We are ready to go. All right, good afternoon. Welcome to the January 16th Finance Committee meeting. We'll call this meeting to order. We need a roll call vote, or a roll call.
I'm sorry, I'll call the roll for you.
Thank you. I have an echo here, so.
Present.
Mr. Hartline.
Present.
Mr. Martin is not in attendance, is he?
I have not heard from him, so I'm not certain if he'll be joining us later or attempting by phone.
We will move on. So the approval of the agenda.
Motion to approve the agenda?
I'll second that.
All righty, all in favor?
All in favor?
Aye. All right, motion passes. It's all yours, sir.
The approval of the minutes from the November 14th meeting.
So moved.
Second, in favor?
All in favor?
Motion approved.
I believe it was only, I don't think Mr. Martin was at that meeting, right?
Correct.
Okay, then we will jump right in. We got a lot of information to get to, so I'll try to keep it moving. If there's any questions, just let me know. So this is our discussion guide, expectations, agenda, financial update. So through the 6 months ending December 31st, revenue is $107,207,173, with expenses totaling $56,863,355. So that's the treasurer's report that was shared earlier this week. And you can see this sort of just breaks it down and summarizes local, state, federal revenue, as well as the expenses. It would be great if these could be blown up larger, but I guess it doesn't get everyone in the picture. And then the expenses by their function group, so instruction, support services, student activities, facilities, and other expenditures and financing. We have a net positive change to the fund balance at this time of $50 million. And you can see the comparison to the same point in time last year. Looking at revenue, taxes levied and assessed, so that is all forms of taxes, not just real estate tax, but any of those 511 taxes that are assessed are included in that grouping. They are up approximately 3.5%, which is good news. The interest revenue, which is a part of local as well, is down 20% compared to the 6 months ending December 23-24 compared to this current fiscal year. If we annualize the December number, which is sort of the conversation we had back in November, it would be projected to be about 2.6. The budget is assuming 2.2. So we still are positive to the budget, but certainly not to the extent that we have in the past. State revenue is down. If you look here, the 11.7 million compared to the 13. That's largely due to a delay in our Social Security reimbursement, which is a byproduct of our reporting challenge with cumulative. Veer and I were just talking about it. I think we've got that squared away. So once that's done, we will file the forms, the reports to the state, and we'll get the reimbursement. We've alerted them to the fact that we had the challenge, and they said that's good to have done. So once that gets settled, that'll catch itself back up.
Are we anticipating that to be about the same as it was last year when it ever comes in?
It should be. It should be. It should be similar, or to some extent, it could be a little bit better none of the people are ESSER funded, right? So all of the ESSER funding has now gone away. We've cleared that. That's something that typically gets subtracted out because you have the grant paying for it. So I would think it's certainly in the neighborhood.
Any timeline on when you anticipate a reimbursement?
I would imagine it to come pretty quickly. I think we will have it wrapped up in the next week. So we'll be shooting that report off, and I'll let them know ahead of time just so that they're on the hook and ready for it.
And that may help our interest number too.
Yeah, yep. And the increase in federal revenue is really associated, and I think we mentioned this last in November as well, the additional access funding that we pulled down on that was a part of the budget discussions last June. On the expense side, through 6 months, we've expended about 43% of the planned expenses. The debt service that was paid in December actually had a reporting challenge that it got picked up in January. So that debt service, you see here, that bottom financing line, 45,000, that should be increased by 7.9 million, which would then put it in the ballpark of the same point last year. It will be lower by a couple $100,000 due to our refinancing. So it was a positive aspect of our refinancing. The expenses seem to be in line as you look down, everything but instruction. And the instruction instruction group, excuse me, I pulled out the special education programs from that, the 1200 series. And you can see that that number is up about 3.5 million compared to where we were last year. Aside, not comparing it to the prior fiscal year, right? We're at 41% of the planned expenses for special ed programs, which is sort of right where we are across the board and right where we'd figure we'd be according to the budget.
Do you have any idea what expense ratio is between the APSs and the Bucks County IU? Are they more expensive, the APSs, or?
I think it really depends, right? As you probably know much better than I, right? It is really the services that are being pulled down, right? We have some very expensive needs that we pay for, right? There's APSs that are in the 5-6 digits per month, right? And then there's some that aren't, right? So in general, I would think the IU is less, but I think that really depends on the student and the services that student requires. Right?
Looking forward to next year.
Yes.
As we are seeing increases in our IEPs and our special ed services, do we have any, and is there any way or any type of leading indicator maybe able to tell us what type of increase we can expect next year in the number of students that we're providing services to? And two, do we have any historical data on how much the APSs have raised their rates year over year for the last couple of cycles?
We went through, Melissa shared that last year, those costs. We don't have any new costs for the IU or expected costs yet, so I think we're still in that planning window. And similarly, a lot of what we banked on in terms of our forecast for the IU came from sort of the early intervention kids who were just coming to Centennial. And Melissa and Lori did a lot of analysis around that and anticipated a fairly steep jump, if you recall, to those special needs, which is why we ramped up our IU costs. I think we'll see. As Mr. Hartline, as you and I talked about, this bold down here, right? The student count is trailing the budget, right? So we had budgeted for 82 students. We're at 57 students being serviced by the IU now, right? So that is a positive for us, right? We won't know for probably at least another month where we are at the mid-year for the IU, but given that discrepancy, right, we've got to be on the plus side of that for the first time in a while, right?
Did we see an increase in our placement services that is similar? In other words, like, so we're 25 short for the IU. Do we know if we saw an increase of APSs that would be treating the students as fair, but also the taxpayers?
Yeah, no, I think that, you know, the children are all different, right? The students have all different needs. And that's what drives ultimately drives their placement.
Exactly. If someone comes in the district, moves into the district tomorrow, and they certainly have the right and we have the obligation to ensure that their education is what it needs to be and provide it.
Yep.
So we always have those, you know, those outliers.
Right.
But, you know, we're just in looking at the big picture. You know, it's nice to see that we were able to retain some students in-house. You know, and I know it fluctuates from year to year. We may have students graduate out of the services, I don't know what we're captured, and then we have a lag until the next student comes in.
Yep. Okay. I will get that back and we'll push that out once I get it, probably in the weekly, because that'll be quicker than the next one of these. Okay?
All right, thank you.
On the capital side, this just repeats our capital budget and the assumptions that were made. This is the cumulative report on the fund activity. I think this is the more meaningful. This just looks at the budget, what we've expensed, what we've encumbered, and sort of our balances to date. The budget was 2.9 million, almost $3 million. We have spent or committed just over 2 million of that, so we have about $900,000 left, $928,000 left. This box up here just identifies what's in this contingency. That $36,000 is made up of those projects. We are going to need to consider, and I believe Mr. Wortman included it in one of the weekly update, the last two, that we had a bus that was rear-ended and totaled. So we're going to need to put out an RFP for that. The insurance recovery is only 25 grand. So we've got to figure out, we're going to need to make that happen. So we're going to need to reach into whether we utilize the district vehicle plug that we just put in, or we use some of the capital contingency. But we're going to need to repair that.
Was this a newer vehicle?
I don't know for sure, but the frame, it was incredible. I mean, it was rented. Video was, the person never stopped, right? The bus was stopped, and that car never, you could see it coming through the rear, you know, when you look out the camera, and it never touched its brake and ran right into the bus. Thankfully, no children, the bus driver and the aide, no children were on board, the bus driver and the aide were fine. The aide got shooken up a little bit just because of, you know, she wasn't strapped in like the driver is. But we're gonna have to address that.
I say one of those jump seats or something.
Yep.
I noticed there, you know, on the transportation that Karen was talking about, the replacement and the funding, you know, for new buses, replacing those real old ones.
Yeah. So
is that going to be something that will be a no cost to us, or is that going to be another, you know, contribution from the district covered?
I'm sorry, I'm not following.
Those grant money there.
Oh, the grant, so yes, so we, Jim, again, working with Karen, did submit for the grant. We've got to see what we will get awarded. So that would be, you know, we can decide how to use that, right? Our fleet has continually aged, right? And we were late getting some relief. So I think once we find out from, if we've awarded anything on that grant, right, we can then decide, do we use that to sort of help us catch up and continue to make this $500,000 investment in our fleet? Or do we abandon that and just use, if we could say, you know, for sake of conversation, we got $500,000 in grant money, do you just leave that alone? I think that would be the question that you'd be looking to work through. Does that answer your question? Does it make sense?
Basically.
I say, and I know from the last, I mean, we've had this on several Friday updates, that, you know, the aging fleet and the number of vehicles that are just beyond economic repair is,
Yep.
we need to,
No,
You're gonna need to pay catch up at some
we
point.
have, you know, that was a, you know, I think moving it outside, making the funding coming from the capital fund has been helpful, because then it's not necessarily in the line of fire against the general fund budget, but we've got to be able to manage that, right? We've got to be able to manage that.
on that same note, I think in the Friday update, they were talking about 3 vans that needed to be replaced as well, that they've kind of aged out. Is that?
Yeah, I think there's some, I think in my mind, right, I call a van just what a van is. Sometimes they use the term van for one of those shorter buses.
Okay, they interchange a small bus versus,
Yes,
okay.
yes, and so I think we're working through that. But
Okay.
I know she is evaluating those as well.
Yeah, because I mean, if they are like the true vans that we use just to transport
Right.
regular ed
Like the
students.
3 vans we just bought.
Oh, I was thinking even
Or our white van.
like our white vans that, you know, like the robotics team uses, or that, you know, that they're going to PMEA stuff or whatever. If it's those vans, then it's obviously a significant different cost than the ones we bought in the fall versus a short bus versus
Right.
right.
Right, and I know, I try not to use them interchangeably.
Yeah.
I think a van's a van. So the vans that we recently bought, or the white vans, to me, they're both vans, but, you know, special ed van, regular van, then a short bus. But I think that's what they're working through. Okay?
Their jargon is different than ours.
Yeah. And just to note, this is our 5-year plan. This hasn't changed from June when we looked at it. But I had a great conversation with Jim Wortman, who has some good experience in mapping out that long-term plan. I think this is something we've struggled with in the operations committee, to try to get our hands around what level of detail works best in a plan that is trying to forecast the future. But I think we need to have something, because we need to be able to plan for it, right? This plan sort of runs out of money. It continues to get transfers in from our debt service fund is what's really funding the capital plan at this point. And it sort of runs out of money in that 28, 29 year as we sit here, you know, back in June.
Is there any of the long-term maintenance stuff, like, you know, I see the HADC, that type of stuff, that we have our staffing internally that we'll be able to handle? Or is a lot of it going to be major overhauls that manufacturers
I
are going
think
to
the
need to
things
be
that are
doing?
on this list are major, right? I think they are, you know, rooftop HVAC units, right? They are the roof itself, right?
I mean, yeah.
Seems familiar with MBIT,
I
right?
was just saying,
All that
MBIT, you
stuff
just did
was
it.
delayed and not handled, and we all
And
paid
then
the
not done
price.
properly.
So in this regard, I mean, I know MBIT, you know, we've got, you know, quite a sizable grant, you know, to replace all the
Right.
HVAC units on
Yeah.
the roof, you know,
Right.
are we looking into any of that as well?
We will be. I think we're looking to try to schedule that out, you know, my comments to Jim were to try to make it more detailed to an extent, so that we know what unit it is, right? So I'm gonna, you know, these are our, you know, here's the HVAC, these are our 30 rooftop units, you know, by name or number, and this is when they were put in service, and this is when we'd expect to take them out of service. I'll be curious to know, at the end of the day, at our next MBIT call, how MBIT is now, with that grant, how they are utilizing the money that the districts, the sending schools all put forth and continue to put forth, right? So I don't know how that shaped their budget, but, you know, sort of getting an update. I know when I talked to them in the fall, at a call with the BAs and the superintendents, they were still working on that, but trying to get our hands around the sending schools paid upwards of $9 million to MBIT. So I know we had problems trying to, sift through that a couple of years ago. I think it's improving. So we'll have to see how that plays out as well.
What would be interesting is if, taking a note from, MBIT, if we start looking at, or start applying for grants now, we can do some proactive changing. If you start getting the money in now, knowing that, we did, I think, when we did the high school first, so the high school probably has the oldest units in it and the most units. If we get grant money and can replace them 2 years ahead of schedule,
Right.
based on grant money, then we are kind of buying ourselves some time and then, also drawing out our capital budget.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great idea. I think I'd like to try to get through that identification stage with Jim.
Yeah.
And then, similar to what he did with the buses, right? He had a list of 20 buses that were 2010 or older, right? Which is, in a 60, 70 bus fleet, that's a decent chunk of our buses that are 2010 or older, and that are diesel.
You can just
right.
look at them.
So,
right. The style of them when you drive behind them.
Yep. So, any other questions on the Capitol? Then sort of rolling right along, as our budget update, one of the things that we'll be seeking approval for on the 28th is the acceptance or the resolution adopting the accelerated opt-out resolution, which will cap any increase to the Act 1, which is 4.0. So I think that process will come up. As we talked about, I think the last meeting, right, the schedule and the timing of the elections impacts this. This needs to be done 110 days prior to the elections. So that's how it lands at January 30th with the presidential primaries. We did this back in December last year, but that's a key step in our process. We will have our first budget work sessions. The first of those will be January 30th at 7 o'clock, and the second one is February 27th, also at 7 o'clock. Just some thoughts and some, sort of beginning this process. The Act 1 index is 4%. Based on the current, that's worth about $3.6 million. 1% is worth about $900,000. There's a note, the IU 23-24 reconciliation, I was incorrect in my reporting in November. It wasn't 601,000, it was 934,000 that we're over the budget, which is a good deal of money. It is significantly less than I had anticipated, right? When I rolled forward the mid-year, I was coming up with a number, as I shared with the budget, right, of almost $2.5 million, right? At least a solid $2 million. So that didn't play out. I've continued to try to figure that out. But that new number is $934,000. That would be something that would typically be a part of the 25-26 budget. And as we discussed last year, we would look to use our surplus from this year to offset that. Okay. As a note around that, any deficit or surplus from this current year has to be recognized in this current year as well. Okay?
Yeah, because they're changing the system.
Correct, right. So we're going to now pay it by December, which, based on the modified accrual basis, anything longer than 6 months, you don't have to report it, and that's how they've gotten around it. I was never very comfortable with that. I'm not sure how they reconcile that.
And I'm not sure how the auditors sit well with that.
No, but that's the rule of the modified basis. But now they're going to require it by December, so we're going to need to know that number, and that number will be a part of our 25-26.
Is that a statewide requirement, or is this just something that Bucks County IU?
I don't know. I mean, I champion. I was glad when I heard it personally, but I can, you know, what the benefit is, it allows us to carry that positive or negative into our budget cycle, right? So it puts it in the budget, doesn't hit you right away, but I can ask, I'll ask the IU. If it's, I would imagine it to be statewide, because it's a drastic change, but I don't know that for sure.
I think it may have been if you're not doing it this way, you now have to, because I do know that there were other IUs, but we're going back to the last time, you know, so 6-8 years ago, that were on a quarterly or monthly basis.
Yeah.
You know, I want to say, I think, like, you know, like Lehigh or like IU 13 down the lower end or something or whatever.
Okay.
I was at a couple meetings with them, so.
Okay.
Used to be a subject of conversation at the PSBA meetings.
Okay. Challenges that I think we're going to have this year, and we talked about these last year, right? The CEA contract is estimated to cost around, in this year, $2.5 million, including PSERS and the payroll tax. That in and of itself would equate to a 2.8% increase. As I shared last week in the weekly board update, the Bureau of Labor Statistics is reporting a 4.3% increase for the 12 months ending September 24th, 2024, for support staff and administrative for school-wide positions. For that support staff and administration, a 1% increase is equal to about $250,000, right?
That state number, was that including both instructional and administrative, or was that strictly from an instructional standpoint?
I think it's combined. I think it is public schools, right? They don't separate in the
Like Act
Bureau of
93.
Labor Statistics. They don't separate them. They have a secondary, elementary and secondary schools, right, under public schools, and that's how they are identified. So I think it is generic.
What was the final outcome of paying the charter schools? You know, did they get down to the 10,000, or are we still paying?
The charter schools change in January, right? So in January, the rate paid to charter schools is now less. It didn't go down to the magic number. What they changed was the differential between special education and regular education, right? So regular education is what you calculate it to be. They reduced the special education bump that they were getting. So that's the piece that changes. And that is effective January 1. So their bills will be a little messy, obviously, when you have something that's taking into account in the middle of the year. But as of January 1, we should be paying a reduced special education rate, as everyone should be, to charter schools.
Did it hit the regular ed students as well?
Pardon me? It did not include, no.
It's going to be interesting to see what comes in the budget address in a couple of weeks and the fallout from that. I mean, that's one of the things I was saying about, you know, talking to the senators about our special ed costs, and, you know, really, it's just skyrocketing.
Yep, for
So
sure.
it'll be interesting, because it has been a political football the last 20 years. I mean,
No, it was amazing, you know, in some ways it was good to see some change, right? I mean, a year or two back, right, they had included an audit provision, and the audit provision didn't even make it through, right? So charter schools aren't really required to have an audit, which amazes me, right? Because they are in fact getting, you know, taxpayer-funded money, right? So I think that the labor piece is going to be difficult, a difficult challenge in the budget for sure. And just to note that the Act 93 agreement expires this coming June. And these challenges are challenges that we certainly have talked about last spring and through the budget cycle at just the minimum, right? So if the support staff in the Act 93 get a 1% increase on top of the teachers' increase, that by itself is 3%, just over 3%. Act One increase, right, tax increase. You know, as we found and as we worked through, it creates very difficult decisions that need to be made, and whether or not people are, you know, whether those need to be, you know, if we have the courage to make them or the desire to make them, we will struggle. And again, I know we talked about this slide on here came from those earlier discussions, right? So what happens if we have the CEA contract? What's the ripple down effect?
So we had gotten, were there not, I'm trying to remember, I know that we had gotten the initial increase in our basic ed subsidy or basic ed funding. And then that was like $180,000 or something. Yep. But was there, something had come through about another increase that we had gotten based on something, it was like $200 and some thousand. I can't find it in my notes. I may have it on my PC at home.
Okay.
But I thought that there was actually two, like the state had come back and then given us another increase in something else.
I think the basic ed funding moved a little bit. I think the special ed funding moved a little bit, but not dramatically, right? Not that it's going to cover.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't, you know, I mean, we get
Yep.
however many millions of dollars from it. It was not a significant increase, but.
Right. And your comment at the board meeting Tuesday with regard to not requiring schools to have their budget done by the 30th at the state, while it sounds novel, right, it will really create chaos in the school world because we can't collect money until that budget's put in place, right? So God forbid, you know, I worked in a nonprofit space for a while, and the state didn't pass a budget until December, right? And I was knocking on bank doors looking for short-term financing. Because, you know, not only do they not pay you till December, they require you to keep providing service.
Yep. And that's
an interesting dynamic.
It's one of those things, right? You know, although the concept seems unique, I don't know the practicality behind it,
Right.
for pushing off dates, especially because, you know, as interest rates continue to drop, us not being able to collect revenue for that period of time also affects that interest rate and additional revenue that we'd get in.
Yep.
Because we are fortunate that we have a number of individuals that when they get their tax bill, pay it right away.
Right, no, we do, we have plenty of them, Any other thoughts, feedback with regard to budget planning, things that you think that we should be taking into account?
You referred to the Act 93 group.
Yes.
Did they not negotiate together with the support
They
staff?
did not, they run on different years.
But I thought last time they
Did not,
negotiated at the same time.
no.
Okay.
No, we negotiated, administration handled that. I'm not sure if that'll be the case this year, but we did them separately. The Act 93, there's very little change the last time with the Act 93, because we did have that compensation study which adjusted some of those rates, so maybe that's what you're thinking. But there was some of that, right?
It looked like there was
And
That was like the
then,
Hayes
and then
report
I
or something.
think on the support staff, we did a lot more work on the support staff agreement which came the very following year. So the support staff agreement runs through June of 26.
And I know we've made adjustments to the support staff over the last year
Yep.
in certain positions.
Right.
So,
And we continue to work and to try to create a more comprehensive plan for them, whether it's on the benefits side. I was meeting with the Health Trust yesterday. The plans that we've put in place, right, were really unique and attribute a lot to Dr. Benton and his sort of always looking outside the box, right? So we have a plan that allows our support staff to have a medical plan. The premiums are very high, but if they utilize the health clinic, which is, 4 miles from here, they're zero, right? So, while the rates come down for that because of the high premiums, or the high copays, if you go to the clinic, those copays don't exist anyway. So it was a really great idea and great thinking. We we also had some takers in our sort of benefit or healthcare plan overhaul that took the low-cost plan, right? We had a few on the teacher side, we had a few on the support staff side that took that, right? And everyone said they wouldn't. You know, I think as we continue to work through that, right, and as people look through and they go, you know what, hey, I made it through a year and I saved a bundle, right? More people may look to that. So I think we want to try to probably even open that up as an alternative to the greater support staff group and sort of company-wide, right? So that everyone sort of has those three choices.
Do we know what kind of numbers shifted from the expense to the expensive one, the cheaper one?
We did a lot of work, if you recall. I don't know if you were part of that negotiating committee,
Twice,
right?
too, because
We did a lot of work on all of the plans, right? We narrowed 6 plans down to 3. We defined a high-cost plan, a core plan, and a low-cost plan. And in each one of those plans, we tweaked inside of them, right? The initial math says that in a full year, we should save about $500,000 based on those changes. This year, because we started in November, we should save about $325, $375 because of the shortened year, because those plans didn't go into effect until November. But we continue, and one of my discussions while at the trust yesterday was trying to get our hands around the RX plan, right? The RX plan continues, specialty drugs continue to be marketed on TV. They continue to be, a lot of people have a need for those specific drugs, and unfortunately, but we are, the number last spring was, that those 12 people utilized, 2/3 of the whole RX plan. So that cost doesn't seem to be ebbing, and something that we've really got to try to figure out. We'll work with the group. Unfortunately, once the contracts get signed, they sort of get locked in. So we've got to try to figure, if we do find a solution, how can we do that across the board?
is there, or has the Health Trust given you any idea of what next year's increase may be? I know my increase this year was about 12%.
Yeah, so they did yesterday during that discussion, and I don't know how I don't have them in my notes from that meeting. That's odd. But maybe I'm clicking on the wrong day. Yes, that's my problem. Sorry. So I think on the health plan side, they're looking at maybe a 4% increase, 3.8% on the medical plan. They're looking at the dental plan at 4.5 initially, and on the RX plan, that's a little more complicated, particularly because we changed the plan in midstream. That one could be closer to 10. But
But that's the one that's going to really hit us, the RX plan.
yeah, the RX plan is a self-funded plan as well, so we're personally all a little more sensitive to it. But those are how they lay out, initially, right? We should learn more over the next 3 months, particularly as the new plans that became effective November 1st, as we get some experience in dealing with those.
I mean, if you look at it like special ed, you have a group of individuals that they have a need, and we have a moral obligation to provide it.
Yep.
So,
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to jump to the 24-25 results. So this shows sort of our history, and then a draft. I just have it as a draft because we're still finalizing the audit, but this is where we intend to be. We have a positive surplus when compared to the forecast. The forecast is what we measured against, was the measuring stick in June with the plan. The revenue variance was a positive $244,000 to that, which is a 0.17%. and the expenses were positive $476,000, which is a 0.33%.
So, this is without, counting that 300,000 that you extra to the IU.
The IU would come out of the surplus.
If we had correct numbers, it would have been 400,000.
Yeah, no, you would have paid another $1 million, right?
But if
So
our
the expenses
original
would have been
forecast
$1
had
million.
been in there, that would be a negative 1.3.
Right.
So,
So,
but we
right.
controlled expenses by a third of a point,
Yep,
and on a large budget of,
right. So
$150 million.
Managed that in.
Yeah.
We had a positive variance, which personally I think is good. And we transferred that surplus. The forecast had a $2.4 million surplus, if you recall. That plus the $700,000, we moved $3 million to our debt service fund. Okay?
Are we in the process of looking at the next debt service fund refinance? Bond
We
issue?
will, it'll, probably in the next
And not
month
till
or
August
two.
or whatever,
Yes,
but-
yeah, probably the next month or two. So I think that one comes a little earlier, and as you recall, right, it's not the same magnitude as the last one, but the last one was certainly a good deal, and we're gonna save, a couple
Another
hundred
couple
thousand
hundred grand.
dollars a year in real money.
Yeah.
And we talked about, and we probably should commit an amount paid out of the debt service fund for another 250, which is what our long-term plan said, right? We were gonna match that and reduce overall debt service by $500,000, right?
It's kind of that smoothing too, where we don't have fluctuations,
Yep.
wide variances from year to year, so.
Right, that's mandatory, right? That's governed by law, not having no smoothing. So a comparison also to our original budget, which, so we have a budget and we have a forecast, which is once we get rolling. If I compare back to the original budget, we had a surplus in revenue of $4.2 million, largely coming from our local revenue. And our expenses were, just over by $1 million, which is less than a 1% variance on the expense side. The taxes collected and our interest earned were the primary drivers. We spoke of that. Mr. Hartline certainly did during all of the budget, all of our regular board meetings, right? We hit a high number in 24 of $3.4 million in interest. It's wild to think if you go back 5 years, right? In 2021, right, we had $37,000 in interest, right? If you took a normal year, if there is such a thing, right, 2019, we had $1 million in interest revenue, right? So it has really been extraordinary as that has ramped up. And I think we've been fortunate and wise to not include that in our everyday numbers and allow that number to fall through and allow us to utilize it for more one-time. That's one-time money, and I think we're using it appropriately.
However, I don't see that number being this high next year.
It will not be that high next year, right? I think it'll be more like 2023 if we're lucky, and I think we're working with PISLAF regularly to try to keep as much of that money that we have invested in rolling. So we'll continue to do that. Positive numbers outnumbered negative numbers when looking at the group of 511 taxes, which are shown in detail down here at the bottom. Transfer tax declined $250,000 compared to FY23. It had declined almost $500,000, $433,000 compared to the budget. So a couple of years ago, I'm not sure, Mr. Hartman, you were on the board at that point, but right, we had a big jump in our Act 55, right, our Act 511 taxes, right, and everyone went north and they all did it in a big jump, everyone was excited. They've sort of leveled off now, right? Things like, the transfer tax, right, where we were In 2022, we had almost 2.4 million in transfer tax. We're at 1.2 million now, right? So those numbers do vary, and it's, a lot of different things going on. Also, it looks like our earned income tax is sort of plateaued now, which we were sort of expecting and waiting. It was, if you look historically, right at this number, right, we were 5.7, 5.9, 6.2, 6.9. That number was rolling. It's now at 7.6, and it seems to be holding. And that's probably makes sense as we look backwards, right? The rear view mirror is sometimes always the easiest, right? As wage inflation is coming under more control, that's probably improving that, making that number sort of flatten out compared to the times coming right out of COVID where costs were sort of, and wages were all over the place. Okay. Again, continuing the revenue, overall revenue was the 4.2 million. Positive variances in state revenue were driven largely by the better than anticipated budget. If you recall, we didn't get that until July in 2024. So that added some, as well as the PCCD grant that we were awarded. We didn't have that. That wasn't known at the time. And we were lucky to collect that and be able to include that in that number. That's about half of the $735,000, if not a little bit more. Federal revenue, we were sort of right on, a couple $1,000 negative variance there. Overall expenses exceeded expenses. That's a heck of a sentence, Tom. By just over $1 million or 0.8%. Which I think is, we're in that under, in the world of budgeting, right? If you're within 3%, I think it's pretty on. If you're under 1%, that's pretty tight window to shoot through.
Any one item can, that $1 million, was there any one item that necessarily stuck out?
It was truly a mix, right, on the salaries and benefits side, right? I think, right, the salaries and benefits were about half of it, and all other things were the other half, which is shown down here, right? Salary benefit variance was 595, and the all other was 500. I think our benefits were a little over budget. They came in higher. Our salaries came in a little lower. To net to that 500 number.
I mean, I know we went out and had to get a couple more special ed teachers. We had a couple other changes that, but to look at $500,000 for the rest of the budget, that's not bad.
Yeah, no, I
not at all.
think we did a good job, if I do say so.
There were special ed teachers that we hired. Was that due to bringing students back from outside placements, or was it just because of growth in special ed?
It was growth in special ed, if I recall correctly.
I think I asked.
It's not as much as bringing kids back. So
I think we had a number of.
We had ELA needs as well. So we had a number of positions we sort of had to get squared away with the change and in the influx of our current student body.
Did we just add a ELE teacher at the high school as well?
I think we did, yes.
Last month.
Okay.
I mean, we are growing.
Yeah. Lastly, on the actual side, this is just a look at fund balance, right? And as I shared earlier, right, particularly around things like interest and one-time tax bonuses, if you will, right? We've really been able to take them and dramatically improve our fund balance. I mean, it's sort of scary to think when I got here, we had $340,000 in our capital fund, right? And the only way we could fix things were to borrow more money, right? To issue more bonds, right? We're in a much different position today, certainly thanks to the board and the work that they're doing around that. But, we wouldn't be doing parking lots if we were, sort of doing bond financing over and over again to do that, or it would just become astronomically expensive. Our bond, our debt service as a percentage of our general fund expenses is the second highest. I know I've shared that before. of all the Bucks County schools. I think our refinance and not taking that money to do something, but actually pay down our debt was very valuable, and I think the taxpayers are appreciative of that focus. A couple of just general updates. I feel like there's we have these meetings, there's a lot of specific, but things that are just general and that are going on, just to keep you abreast. The final expenditure reports, known as the FERs, were submitted for the ESSER grants, ESSER 3 and the HCY and the title grants as well. Vera was amazing. She really did an outstanding job. An outstanding job navigating those, particularly after only being here for 2 or 3 months. She's going back in time 2 or 3 years to figure out where exactly we are. So she's really done an outstanding job. I was very impressed. They're now working. Vera was working with Peggy to work on sort of the documentation organization, right? So we've done that in all the preceding ESSER grants in advance of them knocking on our door and saying, hand over all the information, which will come sooner or later. We want to have them bound and binders so that we can literally just take a binder, hand it to the auditors, and get them running. So that's also great work, so thanks to Peggy as well. We did receive responses to the insurance RFP. As we talked about in this committee, we will look at them, we'll give them a preliminary review, and then we'll identify those that we can call back. We can push that information out to the committee in between meetings to come back with some kind of discussion on who we would like to interview, if you will, what firms that we'd like to interview and move that forward as well.
Are you hearing any rumblings of fallout in our rates because of the natural disasters?
I hear that every year.
Yeah, well,
Unfortunately,
the $100 billion one that just hit. So,
right. It's funny. We were just talking about that. Vera and Katie Smith, who works with us, her husband's a fireman in Philadelphia. So I was interested in his take, but those insurance claims, right? Whether it is that, which is a catastrophe out in Los Angeles, but it could be that, it could be the disaster in the middle states, in the Carolinas, right? They got the hurricane that blew them up.
Or the snowfall that just happened in the south that.
Right. It just seems that every year there is. And every year I can sort of push the recording for the insurance broker when he comes to tell me, your rates are going up. I said, but we live in sunny Bucks County. There's no natural disasters here. Keep it to a minimum. And they're like, that's not how it works. Everyone pays.
Yeah, it's not a regional insurance company.
As we were joking, right, if we're going to be paying for that beachfront renovation that's going to happen, I want a week there, right? I'm going to knock on their door and say, you know what, we're going to swap. Come out and you can live in Fort Washington for a week, and I'll live here in sunny Malibu for a week.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, so I expect that will continue. We've sent to Forecast 5 our draft for the FY24, as well as they've rolled over our 24-25 budget, so we will then be able to resurrect the Forecast 5 reporting that we had done previously. The audit is sort of now narrowly focused on the single audit. A single audit is a grant-specific audit that happens. Typically, they select the higher grants and they cycle through them. Usually, it's 1 or 2. This year with ESSER, we're going to have a single audit on those 3 grants. The whole food service as a grant, the money we get for food service, the final ESSER, as well as our title grant, because that exceeds $1 million. Okay. Mr. Harlow had mentioned about vans, right? And I went back to the notes from Karen Morgan regarding vans. And while there is differences in pay from the district between a van driver and a CDL driver, And I will shoot this out to everybody as just a refresher. I think the true savings isn't that differential, right? It's really not even the differential in gas or diesel or propane, right? The difference in us using those vans is that we don't have to use the IU's vans. That's where all the money is, right? The IU, they provide wonderful services, right? But they are expensive.
An expensive Uber.
They are an expensive Uber, right? And when we were looking at vans, right, they were leasing vans, so they're not even keeping them. So that's a good way to live if you can live that way. I'm a buy it and live in it forever kind of guy. So I expect to have my Jeep for 15 years. So that's really where the savings is, and I think that's what she laid out. And I think if we can reduce our IU transportation costs by 10% or by 20%, by 40%, I think that would amount to real money that we'd be able to save, right? So that we'd need to continue to work on that and continue, right? Because her goal was to sort of get up to 6 vans to really take them out of the van market. It's easier to get van drivers because they don't require the CDL, and similarly, it just saves us money that would be going to the IU. Okay?
So their question would be, how many students do we have the IU transport schools?
Yeah, and what savings we've seen so far. Certainly that's, positive cash flow and offsets the value of the vans.
Make that even bigger, make that clear to the rest of the board.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a
It was
great
only
number
a
to
couple
have.
months into it at this point.
What's that?
They were only a few months into it at this point,
Yep,
so.
no, and it's all of these onesie-two kind of people, right? It's not
Well, I mean-
60 kids all in one bus, right? It is transporting this child to this placement, right? And it's sort of one-to-one, and I think those are the areas that we really get pinched. The vans, I think, that we got, particularly designed, in my mind, for special education, they can stand up, the aides can stand up, you're not sort of bent over and trying to buckle people in. So I will get back to her, but I think that, I know in her view, right, her goal was to try to reduce that number by 25%. She thought she could get to that, reduce 25% of the IU runs, but we can identify that again and put a number on it.
Yes, yeah, because if we could put a number on that for the first budget meeting, when you roll out, 3 new buses and 3 new vans, we can put a number on it saying, we've already saved this amount of money with these vans, the anticipated savings is X, the return on investment is 2 years, or 3, whatever it happens to be.
Right.
So that we're thinking long-term, year-over-year compounded savings.
Perfect. So we're just after 1. We'll try to wrap up. The following it will be shared and presented for information. You have the PISLAF reports from December and January. There's a white paper I thought was interesting from PMA titled "Preserving Income Stability in a Declining Investment Environment," which is us. So that's, sometimes there's stuff in here that's not as useful to read. I think that's a good read. We have the most recent Bureau of Labor Statistics December CPI report that came out yesterday. The thresholds for purchasing, for procurement, changed in 2025. And I have the comparative analytics, but I have not bundled those all together. I will make sure I get that done.
Procurement thresholds, they go up every year based on.
Yeah, based on the CPI, based on that metrics. Yep. I think we also have, is it not on that list? do, right? Peggy, did we not include the mileage rate?
I saw that.
Also,
They went up.
yeah, yeah.
That's an annual.
Again, that's more just informational, it's the IRS.
Yeah, I did say it's like
It went to
67
70
something.
cents now. Now it's 70.
70?
70
Wow.
cents is the new number.
It was,
Yeah.
okay, it was 67. All right.
Yeah, I thought that was on there too.
It was included, because I.
Yeah, oh, okay,
The notes.
thank you.
So if somebody puts 20,000 miles on my corporate car every year, that's good.
There it is, excellent.
Yes.
And then things that we'll be looking for approval is, as I mentioned in the beginning, the adoption of the accelerated budget opt-out resolution. I don't know if there's feedback around that. I mean, I think that the board is sort of seasoned in their understanding of that, but we'll continue to talk about that and share what that means when we do that. We'll be, last in November, we talked about the tax collector compensation plan. I have it on here again because I didn't get it in front of the board. I can show you that.
Yeah, we had reviewed that
Yeah,
before.
we did, and it was approved. This is just how it gets presented to the board, so to keep you guys sort of in pace and show it to you first, this is the numbers. The numbers haven't changed, the math is, and the plan is still the same that we looked at and discussed before, and it reflects roughly a $30,000 increase over on base comp over those 4 years for those 3 tax collectors that we have.
Yeah, they're up for election, so we have to have these done.
Yes, you have to have this done by February 15th of this year, 2025.
For the candidates, so the candidates know what their
So they know
compensation
what they're
would
getting
be,
into.
should they be
Yes.
successful.
Yep, and this is just a portion of the tax collector compensation, right? They have the
County,
township that they're
local.
collecting for in county as well. Yep,
And then any ancillary.
okay.
I don't know, Vera, you get the better option of St. Petersburg versus Hershey in March.
So, because Vera did such a great job, and she won. She out arm wrestled me as well.
Freshwater alligators. When I was in the Navy in Pensacola, they would close running paths because the alligators were out sunning themselves on the path and you couldn't run past them. So you had to do a different route.
So we're seeking approval for Vera to attend the Skyward Icon Conference. We've attended that as a district over the last 3 or 4 years. I know Beth Cruz was there the last 2, found it very helpful. And this year, more than any other year, certainly for the business office, as we've tried to migrate from to the cumulative program, I think we've had a lot of challenges.
Can you put that in the backup for the board motion, that information, especially because we're migrating over, so that if anybody has a question as to the importance of going down.
We actually looked at that yesterday as well.
Did you?
on the
Okay.
education committee.
Good.
There's a comment in there right now that says, importantly, we need to be able to work with someone about our reports. That we're
Yes.
going to get to this point. You didn't.
Yeah.
I just want to be proactive on that.
Excellent point.
Right, so Skyward is the main information system for our students, human resources, business office. We've recently upgraded the business office to cumulative, and attendance to this conference will provide an opportunity for a broader understanding of functionality, and most importantly, to address challenges with the reports provided out of cumulative that we don't need to meet our needs. So that's what's in there now.
And if we need to, I will make a motion to do all these 2 items.
Right. Okay.
So, and then for myself to get to go to Hershey in March, which is wonderful in and of itself, and attend the PASBO conference. difference.
I'm sure it won't be cold or snowy there.
No. Okay. Any questions, feedback, thoughts?
Mr. Godekson made a motion to move those 4 items forward. I will second it.
All right.
Yes to all.
Takes us to adjournment.
Let's say our next meeting is,
Our next meeting is
I think the eyes of February. 13th.
13th. I don't know, I can't scroll down beyond, oh, there it is. Adjournment's on that February 13th, right there. Okay. Make a motion to adjourn.
I will move that.
1 second. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you all.